The emergency lights flickered red across the metal corridors of Kepler Station as Commander Hyan pressed his back against the cold wall. His breathing was heavy, and sweat dripped down his face despite the failing life support systems making everything feel like ice. 21 days. 21 long days since the Vortak had arrived like a plague from the darkest parts of space. The station shook violently as another bioplasma blast hit their outer shields. Hyan felt the vibration travel through the metal floor and up into his bones. Each hit was getting stronger. Each hit meant they were closer to death. "Sir, we lost Section 12, called out Lieutenant Nari from across the emergency command center they had built in what used to be a storage room. Her blue skin had turned pale with exhaustion, and her large eyes showed the kind of fear that comes from knowing death is walking toward you step by step. The Vortak broke through the hull. We had to seal it off. Hyan nodded but said nothing. What could he say? That everything would be fine? That help was coming? They both knew those would be lies. The Galactic Defense Coalition had already sent their final message 3 days ago. Kepler Station was too far away, too expensive to save. They were on their own. The station had been home to over 2,000 people when the attack started. Miners, engineers, security officers, traders, and their families. People from a dozen different worlds who had come here to build something good together. Now less than 300 were still alive, hiding in the intersections while the Vortak slowly ate their way through the station like some kind of metal-hungry virus. Hyan walked to the small window and looked out into space. The sight made his stomach turn. Dozens of Vortak bioships floated around the station like giant insects made of meat and bone. They were alive, these ships. Living creatures the size of buildings that could think and hunt and kill. Their skin glowed with strange patterns that seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. Some were long and thin like snakes. Others were round and fat with tentacles that reached out to grab pieces of the station and tear them away. "Commander," whispered Senior Technician Minji as she crawled over to him, her small frame shaking with cold and fear. "The food ran out this morning. Water recycling is down to 40%. And the air." She paused, not wanting to say what they all knew. "We maybe have 2 days left before the air gets too thin to breathe." 2 days. Hyan closed his eyes and tried to think. 2 days to find a miracle. 2 days to somehow fight off an enemy that had destroyed entire worlds. 2 days to save what was left of his people. The Vortak were not like other enemies. They did not use metal ships or energy weapons like the civilized races of the galaxy. Instead, they grew their ships like farmers grow crops. Each ship was a living thing that could heal itself when damaged, could think for itself, could adapt to any attack. Their weapons were not lasers or missiles but streams of acid that could eat through any metal, and clouds of poison that could kill a person in seconds. But worst of all, they were patient. The Vortak did not attack in wild charges like some enemies might. They surrounded their prey and slowly, carefully, took it apart piece by piece. They seemed to enjoy the fear and suffering they caused. It was like they fed on it. "Sir," called out Security Chief Deho from where he was checking the sealed blast doors. His uniform was torn and dirty, and a bandage covered half his face where Vortak acid had burned him during a fight 2 weeks ago. Motion sensors show them moving again. They are bringing more ships to the north side. Looks like they want to break through there next. Hyan felt his heart sink even deeper. The north side was where they kept the children. 43 kids from babies to teenagers were hiding in the old school rooms, protected by parents who had volunteered to stand guard with whatever weapons they could find. If the Vortak broke through there, "Move everyone to the central core," he ordered. "All civilians, all non-essential personnel. We will make our last stand there." As his people began to move, Hyan thought about the messages they had sent out over the past 3 weeks. Desperate calls for help broadcast to every ship, every station, every military base within 100 light-years. Each message had been the same: "This is Kepler Station. We are under attack by Vortak forces. We need immediate assistance. Please respond." But no one had responded. No one was coming. The coalition had bigger problems, they said. The war with the Zephyrian Empire was taking all their ships. They could not spare even one cruiser to help a remote mining station. It was a cold calculation. 2,000 lives were not worth the risk of losing a valuable warship. Hyan understood their thinking, but understanding did not make it hurt any less. These were good people. Families who had done nothing wrong except try to build a life in the frontier. Children who would never grow up to see their home worlds again. They deserved better than to die alone in the dark while politicians counted the cost of their lives. Another explosion shook the station, and this time the lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, but now everything was dimmer, more frightening. They were running out of time. In the darkness, Hyan made a promise to himself and to his people. If they were going to die here, they would die fighting. The air tasted like metal and fear as senior technician Minji crawled through the narrow maintenance tunnel toward what remained of the sensor array. Her small hands shook as she connected wire after wire, trying to build something that could see beyond the cloud of Vortex ships that surrounded them like hungry wolves. 22 days since the siege began. 22 days of watching friends die, of hearing children cry for parents who would never come home, of slowly starving while monsters circled outside. But Minji kept working because working meant not thinking about how hopeless everything had become. The makeshift sensor screen flickered to life, showing mostly static and interference from the Vortex bioships. Their living hulls gave off strange signals that made normal sensors go crazy. But something was different today. Something was moving out there in the deep dark between stars. That cannot be right, she whispered to herself, adjusting the controls with fingers that had not stopped shaking for days. The reading showed something massive coming toward them from the empty space beyond the system edge. Something bigger than anything she had ever seen. Minji pressed her face closer to the small screen, squinting at the numbers that made no sense. The object was huge, maybe 10 times larger than the biggest coalition warship. But it was moving wrong, too fast for something that size. And the energy readings were completely different from anything in the databases. She crawled back through the tunnel as fast as she could, ignoring the sharp edges of broken metal that cut her arms and legs. The command center felt different when she arrived, quieter somehow. People were sitting against the walls with empty eyes, like they had finally accepted that death was coming for them soon. Commander Hyan was studying a damage report when Minji grabbed his arm. "Sir, you need to see this. There is something coming." Hyan looked up from the report that showed how little time they had left. His face was thin and tired, aged years in just 3 weeks. Coming from where? The Coalition said no ships were available. Not from Coalition space, sir. From outside. From the empty zone beyond the rim. Minji pulled him toward her jury-rigged sensor station. "Look at these readings. It is massive and it is moving directly toward us." Lieutenant Nari joined them, her blue skin now almost gray with exhaustion and malnutrition. The young officer had not slept in 2 days, staying awake to coordinate their failing defenses. "Could be a Zephyrian ship," she suggested without much hope. "Maybe they decided to help after all." Minji shook her head, pointing at the energy signature on her screen. "No sir, this is not Zephyrian. It is not Coalition either. The power readings are completely different. And it is broadcasting something." "Broadcasting what?" Hyan asked, leaning closer to the makeshift equipment. "Old frequencies, sir. Really old. The computer says they are human protocols from before the colony ship disaster." Minji's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "But that is impossible, right? Humans are extinct." The room went quiet except for the distant sound of Vortex bioplasma hitting their failing shields. Everyone knew the story of the human colony ships. 47 years ago, humanity had tried to expand beyond their home system. 3 massive ships carrying millions of people had left Earth and disappeared into the dark between galaxies. Search missions had found nothing but wreckage and silence. The galaxy had mourned briefly and then moved on. Security Chief Daeho limped over, his wounded leg making him walk like an old man even though he was barely 30 years old. "Human signals? Are you sure about this, Minji?" "The computer does not lie, sir. Old Earth frequencies, military codes from their ancient databases. But humans have been gone for almost 50 years. There should not be any human ships left anywhere." Commander Hyan stared at the sensor reading, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The approaching ship was still 18 hours away, but already the Vortex seemed to know something was different. Their attack patterns had changed over the past few hours, becoming more frenzied, more desperate. The bioships were hitting the station harder and faster, as if they wanted to finish their meal before some unwelcome guest arrived. "How big is this ship exactly?" Hyan asked. Minji checked her readings again, hoping she had made a mistake. "Based on the energy signature and mass readings, sir, it is about 3 kilometers long. Maybe bigger. I have never seen anything like it in any database." 3 kilometers. The biggest coalition ships were barely 1 kilometer long. Even the legendary Zephyrian dreadnoughts that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries were smaller than that. What could humanity have built in the dark years after their supposed extinction? Young Communications Officer Hannah looked up from her station where she had been trying to boost their distress signal for weeks. "Sir, should we try to contact this ship? If it really is human, maybe they will help us." "And if it is not friendly?" asked Lieutenant Nari. "What if humans survived but became something else out there in the dark? What if 47 years of isolation changed them into something we do not want to meet? The questions hung in the recycled air like ghosts. Outside, the Vorthack continued their patient destruction of everything they had built here. Inside, 300 desperate people faced the possibility that their salvation might be worse than their doom. Commander Hyan made his decision. Hannah, prepare a message on all frequencies. Tell them who we are and what is happening here. If they are human, they might remember what it means to help people in need. As Hannah began preparing the message, another massive explosion shook the station. More lights went out, and the artificial gravity flickered for a terrifying moment. They were running out of time faster than anyone had expected. In 18 hours they would learn whether the approaching ship brought salvation or simply a different kind of death. The bridge of the Iron Dawn was quiet except for the soft hum of machines that had been running for 47 years without rest. Captain Tejo stood before the main viewing screen, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the distant lights of Kepler Station grow larger. His face was calm, but his eyes held the hard look of a man who had seen too much death and decided to do something about it. Behind him, his crew worked at their stations with the smooth movements of people who had trained together for decades. They were all children of the lost colony ships, born in the cold dark between galaxies where humanity had fled to lick its wounds and grow strong again. None of them had ever seen Earth, but they carried its spirit in their hearts like a burning flame. "Captain," called out Navigation Officer Su Min, her voice clear and professional. "We are now 12 minutes from the target zone. All systems show green. The Vorthack have not detected us yet." Tejo nodded slowly. The Iron Dawn had been built for exactly this kind of surprise attack. While the rest of the galaxy had spent decades perfecting energy shields and plasma weapons, humanity had gone in a different direction. They had learned to build ships that could hide in the dark and strike like thunder from a clear sky. "Weapon status, Kyung?" Tejo asked without turning around. Weapons Officer Kyung looked up from his control panel, his young face serious as death. He had been born on a ship much like this one, trained from childhood to operate the terrible machines that humanity had created in exile. "All magnetic accelerator cannons loaded and ready, sir. Nuclear warheads armed. Point defense systems online. We have target locks on 47 Vorthack bioships. 47 ships against one." The odds would have seemed impossible to any other species in the galaxy. But Tejo had spent his entire life preparing for moments like this. He had studied every battle the Vorthack had ever fought, learned their patterns, understood their weaknesses. More importantly, he knew what human engineering could do when applied with proper focus and unlimited anger. "Communications, any word from Kepler Station?" he asked. Communications Officer Hannah adjusted her headset and checked her instruments. "They are still broadcasting distress signals, sir. Life support is failing. Maybe 300 survivors left out of over 2,000. They sound very scared." Scared. Tejo understood that feeling well. 47 years ago, he had been just a child when the colony ships had fled Earth. He remembered the fear in his parents' voices as they talked about the wars that had driven humanity to the edge of extinction. He remembered the promises they had made to each other in those dark early days. Never again would humanity run from a fight. Never again would they let innocent people die while they had the power to help. "Sir," called out Sensor Operator Jaiwan, "the Vorthack are increasing their attack rate. It looks like they want to finish off the station before we arrive." Tejo finally turned around, and his crew saw something in his expression that made them sit up straighter. It was not anger exactly, though anger was part of it. It was the look of a man who had made a decision that would change everything. "Then we will have to remind them that humans do not like to be kept waiting," he said quietly. "All stations prepare for combat drop. We are going in loud and fast." The next few minutes passed in careful preparation. Weapon systems that had been built in secret shipyards hidden in the dark between stars came online one by one. Engines that could push a 3-kilometer ship to impossible speeds began to build power. Fighter bays opened to reveal small, deadly ships piloted by men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment. "Captain," Su Min announced, "we are ready for faster-than-light exit. Coordinates locked on Kepler Station." Tejo walked to his command chair and sat down slowly. Around him, his officers checked their systems one last time. In a few seconds, they would announce humanity's return to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. "Execute," he said. The Iron Dawn dropped out of faster-than-light travel with an energy discharge that lit up every sensor within 10 light-years. The massive human dreadnought appeared in the middle of the Vorthack fleet like a metal mountain falling from heaven. Its angular hull, scarred by decades of battles in the dark between galaxies, reflected the light of the distant star as it oriented itself toward the nearest group of bioships. On Kepler Station, every surviving crew member pressed their faces to whatever windows they could find. The ship that had just appeared was larger than anything they had ever imagined. It bristled with weapons that looked different from anything in the Coalition databases. Instead of the smooth, curved lines that most species preferred, this ship was all sharp angles and brutal efficiency. Unknown vessel, Commander Hyan broadcast on all frequencies, his voice shaking with hope and disbelief. This is Kepler Station. We are under attack and request immediate assistance. The reply came back in perfect galactic standard, but with an accent that had not been heard in the civilized galaxy for nearly 50 years. The voice was calm, confident, and absolutely terrifying in its certainty. Kepler Station, this is Captain Tejo of the Human Defense Force vessel Iron Dawn. We received your distress call. Hold your positions. Help has arrived. In the silence that followed, 47 Vortak bioships turned toward the human vessel like predators sensing a new threat. They had no idea they were about to learn why humanity had spent 47 years preparing for this exact moment. The galaxy was about to remember what human warfare looked like. The magnetic accelerator cannon fired with a sound like the universe tearing apart. A tungsten rod the size of a small car accelerated to 12% of light speed in less than 3 seconds. When it hit the nearest Vortak bioship, the living vessel simply stopped existing. One moment there was a creature the size of a city block floating in space. The next moment there was nothing but an expanding cloud of organic matter and confusion. Captain Tejo watched the tactical display with the calm expression of a man who had been planning this moment for decades. Around him, his crew worked with deadly efficiency at stations designed for one purpose: killing things that needed to die. Target destroyed, reported Weapons Officer Kyung, his voice steady as stone. 46 Vortak vessels remaining. All cannons reloaded and ready. The Vortak fleet had stopped moving for a moment, as if the bioships could not believe what they had just witnessed. These creatures had conquered dozens of worlds, destroyed entire fleets, and never met an enemy they could not adapt to or overwhelm. But there was no adapting to a chunk of metal moving at 36,000 kilometers per second. "Sir," called out sensor operator Jaiwan, "the Vortak are changing formation. They are moving to surround us." Tejo almost smiled. Surround them. As if 46 bioships could threaten a vessel that had been built in the dark between galaxies by people who had spent 47 years thinking about nothing but revenge and protection. "Launch all fighters," he ordered. "Phoenix Squadron, you are cleared to engage. Show them what human pilots can do." The launch bays of the Iron Dawn opened like the mouth of some metal beast, and 36 fighter craft shot out into the darkness. These were not the sleek, shielded fighters that other species used. These were small, fast missiles with human pilots inside them, designed to get close to enemy ships and deliver nuclear warheads with surgical precision. Lieutenant Jaiwan led Phoenix Squadron out of the launch bay, her fighters' engines burning bright blue against the star field. She had been born on a ship like the Iron Dawn, trained from childhood to fly and fight in the vacuum of space. Her voice crackled over the communications system as she led her squadron toward the nearest group of Vortak bioships. "Phoenix leader to all birds," she called out. "Weapons are hot, targets are many. Remember your training and make humanity proud." The fighters spread out in perfect formation, each pilot knowing exactly what to do without needing orders. They had practiced this attack pattern thousands of times in simulations. Now they would find out if all that training was worth anything against real enemies. The Vortak bioships tried to respond, shooting streams of acid and clouds of poison gas at the approaching fighters. But human pilots had learned to fly in ways that other species thought impossible. Where aliens relied on computer systems and automated defenses, humans trusted their instincts and reflexes honed by generations of void warfare. The first nuclear torpedo launched from Phoenix 3 hit a Vortak cruiser right in its center mass. The atomic explosion tore through the living ship's body like fire through paper. The creature died screaming across bioelectric frequencies, its death cry picked up by every other Vortak vessel in the fleet. "Good kill, Phoenix 3. Jaiwan called out as she lined up her own shot on a snake-like bioship that was trying to flank her squadron. Phoenix leader going in hot. Her torpedo found its mark, and another Vortak vessel convulsed and died in nuclear fire. Around the battlefield, other fighters pressed their attacks with ruthless efficiency. These pilots had grown up hearing stories about the wars that drove humanity into exile. They had trained their entire lives for the chance to show the galaxy that humans did not forget, and humans did not forgive. Back on the Iron Dawn, Captain Tejo watched the tactical display as his weapons officers selected targets with mechanical precision. The magnetic accelerator cannons fired again and again, each shot destroying a Vorthack bioship that had thought itself safe behind living armor and adaptive biology. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Hannah, "we are receiving surrender signals from some of the Vorthack vessels. They want to withdraw." Tejo's expression did not change. "Negative. No quarter given." They had their chance to leave Kepler Station alone. The slaughter continued for 17 more minutes. Vorthack bioships that had terrorized dozens of worlds found themselves helpless against an enemy that fought with calculated brutality. They tried to adapt, tried to evolve defenses against the human weapons, but evolution takes time and humans were not patient. Point defense systems on the Iron Dawn created walls of hypersonic projectiles that shredded any bioship foolish enough to get close. Nuclear warheads cracked living cruisers in half like breaking eggs. Magnetic accelerator rounds punched through adaptive armor as if it was made of tissue paper. The survivors on Kepler Station pressed their faces to whatever windows they could find, watching in amazement as their rescuers systematically destroyed an entire Vorthack fleet. Commander Hyan found himself crying as he watched bioships that had killed his friends and colleagues die one by one in nuclear fire. When the last Vorthack vessel exploded in a ball of atomic fury, the space around Kepler Station fell silent except for the drifting debris of what had once been a conquering fleet. 47 bioships reduced to 47 clouds of organic matter floating in the void. Captain Tejo's voice crossed the emptiness between ships, calm and professional as if he had just finished a routine training exercise. "Kepler Station, this is Captain Tejo. Threat neutralized. Prepare to receive medical and engineering teams." The galaxy had just been reminded why humanity was not extinct. Commander Hyan stepped through the airlock into the Iron Dawn and felt like he was walking into a dream. The corridor stretched before him, clean and bright with the kind of lighting that spoke of unlimited power and careful engineering. After 3 weeks of failing life support and emergency lighting, the human ship felt like stepping into paradise. His surviving crew followed behind him, 300 people who looked more like ghosts than living beings. They moved slowly, carefully, as if afraid that this rescue might disappear if they made too much noise. Children held their parents' hands with grips tight enough to leave marks. Adults kept looking over their shoulders, not quite believing that the nightmare was finally over. The human crew members they passed in the corridors nodded politely but did not stare. They wore uniforms that looked practical and well-made, with patches and insignia that spoke of a military organization that had been building itself for decades in secret. These people moved with confidence and purpose, like they belonged on a ship this size and knew exactly how to use it. Captain Tejo waited for them in what could only be called a conference room, though it was larger than most meeting halls Hyan had ever seen. The human captain stood when they entered, a gesture of respect that surprised the survivors. Here was a man who commanded a ship that could destroy fleets, showing courtesy to people he had just saved from certain death. "Commander Hyan," Captain Tejo said, extending his hand in the ancient human greeting. "I apologize for taking so long to respond to your distress call. We came as quickly as we could once we detected your signal." Hyan took the offered hand and found his voice after several attempts. "Captain, the galaxy thought humans were extinct. The colony ships were lost 47 years ago." Captain Tejo's smile was sad but not bitter. "Lost, yes. Extinct, no. We learned a hard lesson when our people were scattered and our worlds burned. We learned that sometimes you have to disappear in order to survive. Sometimes you have to go into the dark to find the light again." He gestured toward the large viewing window that showed the debris field where the Vorthack fleet had died. "We went to the edge of everything, Commander. Beyond the rim, beyond the trade routes, beyond anywhere the wars could follow us. We built new ships, trained new crews and waited for the right moment to return." Lieutenant Nari, still weak from weeks of poor food and thin air, managed to speak up. "But why reveal yourselves now? Why risk exposure for a mining station?" The human captain's expression grew serious. "Because 47 years ago when our ships were burning and our people were dying, we sent out distress calls too. And no one came. No one thought we were worth saving." He paused, looking directly at each survivor in turn. "We made a promise that day. Never again would we let innocent people die while help existed." Communications Officer Hannah stepped forward, carrying a data pad that showed sensor readings from across the local sector. "Captain, the fleet reports all vessels in position. Operation Homecoming is ready to proceed." Hyan felt his legs grow weak. "Fleet?" Captain Tejo walked to the viewing window and activated a display that showed the space around them in 3 dimensions. What Hyan saw made him sit down heavily in the nearest chair. Dozens of contacts were appearing on the screen, ships emerging from the dark between stars like metal whales rising from an ocean of night. 237 vessels, Commander, Tejo said quietly. Dreadnoughts, carriers, support ships, hospital ships. Everything we need to protect the people who cannot protect themselves. The survivors from Kepler Station watched in amazement as more and more human ships appeared on the display. These were not the sleek, elegant vessels that the Coalition preferred. These ships looked like they had been built for war and nothing else. They had sharp angles and heavy armor and weapon systems that spoke of serious intent. "This will change everything," whispered Security Chief Tejo, his bandaged face showing wonder and fear in equal measure. "The Coalition, the Zephyrian Empire, everyone will want to know where you have been and what you want." Captain Tejo nodded slowly. "We know. And we are ready for those conversations. But first we have work to do. There are other stations like Kepler, other people in need of help. The galaxy has grown used to writing off casualties as acceptable losses. That ends now." Senior Technician Minji looked up from where she had been studying the human ship's displays with professional curiosity. "Captain, your technology, it is so different from what the rest of us use. Where did you learn to build weapons like this?" "Necessity," Tejo replied simply. "When you are fighting for the survival of your entire species, you learn to be very creative about solving problems. While the galaxy spent decades perfecting energy shields and plasma weapons, we focused on kinetic energy and nuclear fire. Sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones." As if summoned by his words, more human ships continued to appear on the sensors. Each one was a testament to 47 years of careful planning and patient construction. Each one represented thousands of people who had been born in exile and raised with one goal: returning home strong enough to protect the innocent. Commander Hyan stood up slowly, feeling strength returning to his legs as hope filled his chest. "Captain, what happens now? What happens to us?" "Now, Commander, you go home to your families. You rebuild. You remember that you survived something terrible because you refused to give up." Captain Tejo turned from the window to face the survivors directly. "And you help us spread the word that humanity has returned. That no one fights alone anymore.